Hello, everyone. We will be starting here in just a moment, giving the last few stragglers a moment to get dialed in. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon where you're joining us from around the globe. This is Robert Leek, Director of Marketing here at eFolder and I'm very excited to welcome you to our second installment on the Secrets of Security webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about application security, what your app store doesn't tell you. And really excited to be not only talking about this, but also welcoming a new party to this program. Webroot Smarter Cybersecurity will be joining us today. We've got someone on their leadership team who I'll be introducing momentarily, but definitely happy to have a second perspective to speak with our own Chief Information Security Officer here at eFolder, Joshua Foltz, on application security. Before we get too far, there's a few just housekeeping items, if you will. We are recording today's session, so if you don't happen to catch all of it or have any issues, we'll be sending that out in our email follow-up, so keep an eye out for that, along with the deck as well, and the slides and the information. If you would like to review it, it'll also be on our YouTube channel. We are going to be doing questions at the end, but if you have anything pop up throughout the program, we want this to be completely interactive, so just pop those questions into your GoToWebinar access panel there on your screen. And at that point, I think we are ready to get going. Looking at today's agenda, again, we are modeling the security training that we're focusing here over the next few months around the CIS top 20 critical controls. We went over those controls in our first installment, along with the information around end user, educations of end users on their parts of the equation in cybersecurity, and most importantly, how you could have a revenue stream evolve from educating and preventing cybersecurity, and really having revenue come from preventing your own headaches from the management and infections that would subsequently follow. So really excited about that. We'll have those links in the follow-up email if you want to go back and find those assets if you weren't able to join us for that. Also, once we get through the application securities, we're breaking this down into about 4 or 5 components, and then also, as it relates to prevention and how you can manage these issues as well, we'll be diving in both strategically and also subsequently, I think, fairly specific on the Webroot side. Speaking of which, I would like to introduce from Webroot, George Anderson, Product Marketing Director of about 7 years with Webroot. And not only that, he's got a much better dialect than myself, along with, yeah, a little bit different than the Southern twang. But George, you bring not only a deep resume from Webroot, but about 19 years in IT security. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, a little bit of a long while. I started off in working for a company called Computer Center, who's a huge system integrator in the UK. Give you some idea, they're like $6 billion turnover, 10,000 employees throughout Europe. So, sort of sat in there in the security practice for a few years and sort of helped set that up and sort of deal with lots of different vendors. So yeah, lots of time there, and then a little time at ClearSwift, which is a UK company, especially in web appliance and email appliance and content security, in the sense of they had a product called Minesweeper, actually used from people like the FBI too. That actually looks at content flying through gateways and says, whether you want to allow that content or not. So yeah, and then obviously here at lovely old Webroot. So I'll give you an idea of Webroot and a quick overview. I think the key thing is some of these figures are actually out of date. Things move pretty fast. We've got about 12,000 MSP partners now. We are still #1 with MSPs according to MSP Mentor, so that's a great thing. I think it's something we've really worked at, because we're very, very focused on the MSP space and also on SMBs and helping both of those, achieve sort of success, if you like, in stopping the bad guys from winning. We are very big in retail in the UK, in North America as well. Probably if you walk into a Best Buy and you walk out the door, there's like a 3 in 4 chance you'll walk out with Webroot on the PC or laptop that you bought. I think a very critical thing and a part of our business that's not maybe so well understood is that we have a very large threat intelligence business, which has been established actually probably over the last 10 years or so, but it's really grown dramatically over the last 4 or 5. We bought a company called BrightCloud back in 2009, 2010. It's actually a bit longer than that. It tends to fly by. So the last 7 years, and that's grown from about 3 vendors then to actually it's closer to 70 network and security vendors who actually take, if you like, threat intelligence feeds from us each day, and at the same time return information back to us. So it's sort of one of those things where, you know, the more there are, the more varied the threat intelligence, the wider the perspective you have of what's going on, and the more you can apply that. And then we also apply that threat intelligence within our products. So that's about it. We're, you know, a little bit over probably 300,000 business customers now. We've probably got a slightly larger number of endpoints out there. Just I think the key thing for us, as I said, is we're sort of very, very focused on the MSP space and helping people achieve better security. And I know you're going through the CIS framework today, and there's lots of other things that Webroot are sort of planning to bring to market in the next year or so. It's going to fit it well into this framework as well. So with that, I'll just hand back.
Excellent. Thank you so much, George. And as you mentioned, you know, that's one of the reasons I think that partnering with Webroot and eFolder Axient made sense with your, you know, expertise in the threat security landscape. And then, of course, with what we bring to the table, you know, should and kind of when all else fails, we definitely want to make sure that our MSPs have the backup protections, and that's where eFolder Axient comes into play here. In short, you know, we have a suite of solutions that protects layers of data no matter what you're working with your clients on, whether it's our original solution that was really built from the ground up for MSPs focused on the file level backups with that backup solution. Then we moved into file sync and share that brings an additional level of security and makes it so much more than file sync and share with Anchor and the levels of control that your clients have in managing their own data. And then subsequently with Cloud Finder and cloud-to-cloud backup, we bring a solution that you can staple onto Office 365 and give infinite amounts of storage and retention for those email, calendars, contacts, and SharePoint, with OneDrive actually coming later this second quarter. And that product we see not only provides a value to your customers and, you know, the deletion of data, but also provides margin on a solution like Office 365 that I think are pretty tight when you're selling that directly. And then lastly is our BDR. Replicate and Axient BRC are 2 BDR solutions that we now have a part of our suite of solutions, and they both offer something a little unique. Replicate brings a really nice, strong on-site virtualization with chain-free technology, really cutting back the excess fat of that data that you're having to protect, with Axient bringing a solution that was built from the cloud down. So if you have really clients that have minutes meaning dollars as it relates to business continuity, Axient can bring those systems and those worlds back up and running very quickly within the cloud within minutes. So again, we think that, you know, partnering with Webroot and eFolder Axient brings a nice perspective of security with threat management, what happens if things get by, and then most importantly, bringing a wealth of knowledge on the cybersecurity realm. And that's where I'm going to bring in my friend and my colleague, Joshua Foltz, eFolder Axient Chief Information Security Officer. Joshua, can you kick us off with what we're going to be doing today?
Sure. So, thanks, Robert. So more or less, we're basically going to keep going through the CIS top 20 controls. And the ones we're going to focus on today is the inventory, controlled use of admin privileges. So we're pretty much just targeting application-based security. So it's more of a topical discussion. We'll go through other topics as we go through this webinar series, but today we're going to cover these 5 different points, and we'll go through each one in detail. So let's start with inventory and control. So one of the things that CIS recommends is that you understand not only where your systems are in the environment, but also what software exists in your environment, and to a little bit greater degree than you might expect. So one of the things that's important to understand when you're tracking software is not just software that you may have installed on a client machine and sent out or configured or whatnot, but what have they installed? What's been installed without your knowledge? So I'm sure a lot of you have installed some sort of software, and come to find out at the end of it, they changed your search engine and several other things through the install process. So applications get on machines several different ways. You want to be able to track each and every application for lots of different reasons. And version numbers. So Java is a great example of knowing when a good version number is present and when it's not. You have the wrong version of Java and you have serious security holes in your environment. So understanding not only what software is there, but what version of software is present. So when we talk about applications, there's 3 different types that we can talk about. And as MSPs, it's important, like some of these you're going to be managing and controlling, some of them you just need to be aware of, and some of them you want to build services around. And we have a few questions coming up where we can dive into, whether or not you have customers that are actually developing software and things of that nature. But no matter what, these 3 types of software are typically present. So you have your client applications, which are installed on your devices, on your Macs and PCs and Linux devices that are out there. And then you also have internal web applications. So a lot of companies are using some sort of intranet. They're using some sort of hosted environment. They might be using SharePoint or something to communicate to their employees that's not necessarily intended to be outside of that. It's understanding what internal web applications exist. I had a penetration testing engagement a few years back, and it started with a review of this company's web applications. It was a pretty large company. It was about 5,000 or so folks. And I asked them before we started, I said, how many web applications do you think exist in this environment? And there's lots of developers running around and people who had a good understanding of how the internet works. And they said, well, we probably have 50 or 60 out there. And when I started the review, we did an initial scan and started diving into a few of these. We found 2,300 web applications that existed in their environment. And these are things, go ahead, Mark.
2,300 and they thought 50 or 60.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that a popular problem out with clients in the world where they think they have a control on this part of what should be fairly stable, but in reality they do not?
Oh, yeah. So a lot of servers are misconfigured. They're running IIS. They don't even know it. Internet of Things devices. So your thermostat now has a web application. Your water heater. In this particular environment, we found a water heater that was accessible to the internet, not just to their internal network. And you could crank up the temperature on it to the point where this particular heater was industry grade. You could literally just start blowing pipes. You could crank it up all the way.
Wow.
And so that was a security risk in their environment. You could blow something up. So you never know what these web applications are, what they're doing, what they're for, but understanding what they are. And we'll go into how to find these in a later slide through scanning and some technologies there.
Okay.
And then the third thing is applications that your users are using. So this could be Slack as an example, or Salesforce, or something that's a web application. To a network device, it just looks like the internet. But these are applications that store data. They have access to your environment. They have access to employee information. They might have access to the company's clients. Could have access to HIPAA data, right? There's any number of things that can happen in this environment. And so understanding what web applications are in use, and that can be a hard thing to get your mind wrapped around, right? So what are my employees doing on their browser is a very difficult thing to understand. If you look below at some of the solutions that do this, the CASB, C-A-S-B, that might be a new term for a few of you. That is a product that does specifically that. So it looks at inbound and outbound traffic and tells you what web applications are in use and what they're being used for. So you may find that a lot of your users are using Dropbox and Box and OneDrive and some of these different file share environments. And that might be an opportunity for you to come in and say, oh, well, we have this anchor product. We can protect your data. We can restrict access to it after an employee leaves. So if an employee sets up a Dropbox account and they quit your company, how do you gain access to those files that are in that Dropbox account? It's a serious risk. So understanding what applications are in use is important. You need to be able to identify new and unknown applications. So if you have rogue malware in your environment, something that hasn't been seen yet by your antivirus vendor, you want to know where it is and what machines it's on and what machines you need to disconnect or what machines need to be whitelisted and those application processes stopped. So you need to understand what exists, and that's one of the good reasons for inventory. So this can be an offering that you build on top. of your current service offerings. This can be a differentiator. Ask, when you're going out and prospecting, does your current MSP know what applications exist in your environment? Are there unknown applications? Do these pose risk? What are they doing about that? Those types of things. It just makes you look like you know what you're doing. Some of the solutions here, there's obviously software that does this. It's typically expensive and overrated. Big environments use things like BigFix or Symantec's got something. But your RMM can be used for this in a lot of scenarios. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if you want to use your RMM as a preventative feature. So we use the example of ransomware. You want it to be able to stop ransomware in your environment once you've identified it. Then you have to build a script beforehand to do that, right? So have a few things kind of ready and on hand to be able to execute if you see something that shouldn't exist, or you see a vulnerable version of CC Cleaner come out, and you want to be able to block people from using it while you get everybody updated, things like that.
Hey, George, are you seeing anything from your perspective on the inventory control around the vulnerabilities aspect that should be kept in mind in a situation like this?
Yeah, sort of a few things. I think one of the areas that we sort of seen particularly is RDP as sort of something that is sort of, a lot of people, a lot of us use RDP to remote into devices, etc. And we've seen lots of attacks around RDP and lots of ransomware getting into the systems because of sort of really, loose controls of our RDP. I mean, it tends to use a standard port and a standard administrator password, and a lot of people are not sort of doing very much with that in that sense. I think there's a scan recently found about 11 million devices actually were using, had left those ports open. I think it's port 3389 or something, and 4.1 million were using RDP. And the thing is, a lot of people then think, well, I'll just put a strong password on it and that's it. And actually there's some very large timeouts on RDP as well. So people can use brute force against it very successfully as well. So the brute force in. And of course, once you're in at that level and into those systems, you can actually look around and pretty much, you can pull in the whole network from that sort of situation. So we view, RDP exposure as a very sort of like key thing. It's actually something we're sort of saying is one of the top risks still facing everybody in 2018 is just that lack of tie down. So I suppose that from the point of view of an existing application that exists and something that's there's some things going on there. There are other things, but that's really the main thing.
Okay, thank you very much. And as we transition to the next point, so Joshua, you said that, inventory and control, certainly something that you could try to make a service around as an MSP, but at the same time, this is more of an opportunity for you to highlight perhaps some weaknesses that they're currently working with. Fair?
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, very good. All right, so we're going to move in now to the administrative privileges. Joshua?
Yeah, it's a good tie-in. I mean, like George was talking about, understanding your passwords and your credential security is extremely important. So strong passwords. I just had a situation recently where someone was convinced they had a very strong password. Their husband had told them this was a strong password. They thought it was, and it was not. It was a very simple to guess password, and any password cracker out there probably would have found it within a few minutes.
Wow.
And so strong password is relative, obviously, and so even exposing RDP has its risks and its issues, along with SSH and any sort of management type of protocol. So on that topic, understanding and managing administrative and critical accounts is a very big deal. And there's some ways that you as an MSP can protect your users from this, right? So you can provide services around password vaulting, which you can see, and we'll go into a few of these different password methods. But there's products like LastPass and OnePass, and you can set up something more complex than that using some sort of KeyPass database or something that you can offer to your clients to help them manage passwords. So password reuse is a very big deal. Weak passwords is a very big deal, and this could potentially be one of the highest risks in my mind on the internet today. So we have all these users going out there using SaaS and cloud applications. They're managing them using their credentials, and they're trying to keep track of all these passwords in their head. They're reusing passwords. They don't know when their password's been compromised. So if they had a password that they used on LinkedIn before the LinkedIn breach, that password has been compromised. So there's users out there running around using the exact same passwords, and that password is on the internet, quite literally. And you can find those passwords. If any of you are curious, you can find those. There's a website called Have I Been Pwned, Pwned, and you can put in your email, and it will tell you if your password or your account has been owned, and it will tell you your password if it has. So it's a super useful tool, and I think I've even had some MSPs reach out to me. They're building product offerings around, securing their users on the internet, and they'll run all their emails through a service like that, and then they add some additional services on top. So there's some value here, and a lot of this around teaching and training too. So one of the things we teach 2 different methods for remembering passwords, and one's the passphrase. So length is your friend when it comes to passwords. The longer your password, the better. Most rainbow tables that are out there only go up to 10 or 11 characters or something like that. So if you have a password that's 30 characters because it's a full sentence, they're never going to find you, even if it's all letters. So we gave a few examples here. This goes back to my childhood days. You can't do that on television. So the first one is a password. So spaces often can be used as passwords. There's a few special characters in there, and most importantly, it's very long. Now, a lot of web applications, while they're trying to protect you from using a bad password, won't let you use this password because it doesn't include numbers, and it may be too long. There's a lot of services out there that only let you do 16 characters or something like that, which is very frustrating to me. So you might shorten it up and make some changes to it by getting rid of the spaces, adding some uppercase, some numbers, like you can't do that on TV, the password right after it. So both of those are very strong passwords. Another one's substitution method. This is good for websites that you use on a personal level or things that aren't as critical or secure. So you come up with some sort of passphrase like cha-cha-chia, and then you include, you modify it a little bit. So this one's for eBay. You can see the word eBay in there backwards. So you use your secure lettering around something associated with that site. And that could be a substitution method. Not great for critical systems, but far more secure than what people are coming up with on their own in most cases. And then password vaulting is obviously our favorite. So if you can have a tool that provides a sufficiently random password and it doesn't look like anything and it's super long and has characters and special characters and things like that, those are very, very difficult, if not impossible, to crack.
Okay. And Joshua, we got a question here from Floyd talking about a lot of these password questions or methodologies. And you mentioned at the end user level, and we're talking about administrative privileges. And Floyd is wondering, are these things that we should be passing down to end users or be using for administrative controls within the network itself?
Both. So when you're talking about administrative controls as an MSP, you want, if your account was compromised, that could potentially lose you this client, right? So if you have administrative login and a hacker gets into it, that just looks really bad on you. So I would highly recommend the password vaulting solution with extremely difficult passwords, even overly strong. But in addition to that, we talked about training in the last webinar. Training your users to be on the internet securely is of great value. And it's something that's grossly needed. Yep. Most people out there don't know how to make a strong password. They know not to share it, but they don't know how to make it. And they all have these crazy ideas on how to do it. And, because their mom told them that they tried this, or it's insane what I hear from people. I wish I could come up with an example. But.
And George, I believe you guys at Webroot have kind of moved into maybe even producing some solutions around that. But obviously with the endpoints, I assume that you've got some pretty strong perspectives as it relates to the challenges around these types of privileges and keeping the users in check.
Yeah, and I think for us actually, if I was being honest, I think we're just about catching up now. I think we've, even our admin rights, if you like, on our console, we've had a few chats with our MSPs about it, and we're in the process of making that stronger. It uses a multi-factor sort of approach, but I think we're generally thinking about stepping that up. I think this, funny enough, I think this area is very critical. That's because I just know the brute force attacks these days are so powerful, just because of basically people are using GPUs. They're not using CPUs to crack passwords. They're using GPUs. They're just like mining, if you like. They're using the same processing, and they're just chucking things. Yeah, and the thing is, really, fairly strong passwords can actually be broken surprisingly rapidly these days. I think even more rapidly maybe than we all think. So, I mean, for me, I think this is a really critical area. And obviously, I mean, admin rights, obviously, on anything is very bad news, but the user side of it is a particular thing. And even, we're a security company, so we obviously get forced to change our passwords fairly regularly and go on here to do that. But I think even internally now, we're sort of stepping this up because it's just become such an issue. Obviously, there are different ways. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of phishing goes on to get this thing. There's a lot of credentials thrown through phishing and those sort of attacks. So we also have some defenses against that. But outside that, I think it's going to the things here, single sign-on or one-use passwords as well, which I think is something that's become increasingly increasingly useful for people to use, and that's sort of another way around it. But it's all about digging down, I think, into the settings of those applications, which we were talking about a minute ago, and making sure they're set up in a way that you don't have, unlimited goes at getting the password right, and all those things. You can sort of cut that all down.
All right. That's good. Yeah, and George, you mentioned a few compensating controls there, and these are services that as MSPs you could be offering to your clients, and one of them is single sign-on, right? So you have a specific application that a user will sign into. They remember one strong password to get into this application, and it logs into other things for you. And so you can look at products like an Okta or a Ping, where you can build a service offering around that and sell that single sign-on to your customers. They're going to love it because it's super easy for them to use. It's user-friendly. They don't have to remember all these passwords, and then it adds a layer of security.
I think the other thing, the other thing I was going to say there quickly, actually was just passing this morning. I was watching CBS News this morning, and they were featuring a company called CloudCare, who are sort of like we're just quite interested in the area of VPNs at the moment, so you expect us to announce something about VPNs, but they're a sort of a consumer-like VPN product, and there's quite a big move as well to sort of going into sort of these VPN type transactions all the time to sort of stop some of that, to make it more difficult, if you like, for things to happen to as part of that solution. But it's just a really key area, and as they say, a lot of services you can layer on top of it to sort of make it as secure as possible.
Yeah, and multi-factors goes a lot to that as well. So I put those down here real quick. So you have something you have, something you are, something you know. There's this fallacy out there on the internet that your fingerprint is more secure than a strong password. It's still a single phrase or a single piece of data, and so it can be intercepted and repeated somewhere. So having more than one of these in a login process, and I do this on personally on any system that's easily compromised. You see people compromising Gmail accounts and iCloud accounts, and not that I'm a politician or a big target or anything, but I certainly don't want my data out there. So I use multi-factors anywhere I can on those critical systems.
Okay. All right. I think moving on to the next topic of network ports and protocols.
Yeah, and there's actually a question on this, so I'll get to it at the end of this slide from Adam. But at a very high level, most of you are probably offering some sort of firewalling service to your customers. And a traditional firewall, your layer 4 firewall that allows an IP in and IP out, source and destination port, the 5-tuple bits of information, simply isn't set up to protect users from attacks nowadays. So in the last session, I mentioned B-Sides. B-Sides is it's a security webinar training type thing. They happen all over the country, and basically what it is a bunch of hackers getting together, and they perform kind of a cat and mouse game. So half of them decide they'll be offensive, half of them decide they'll be defensive. And a good friend of mine just went through one of these, a guy named Eddie Mize, and he was telling me about his successful defensive strategy. So he had gone into an environment, they had Active Directory, they had built up nodes, they had network devices, they started updating everything, and their strategy was simply this, that they didn't care if the system was compromised. They simply managed all outbound data. So on the firewall, they used a layer 7 firewall. They could look at applications and could make a decision as to whether or not you're allowed to go to Microsoft Office, not just port 443. And they locked it down. So they controlled DNS, and then they lock down this outbound firewall. So even if a system was compromised in this environment, which is pretty likely because there's lots of Windows vulnerabilities and SSL vulnerabilities and things like that, they couldn't get the data out. The data could never leave the environment because they controlled all the outbound rules at the perimeter. And so controlling your ports and protocols inbound is good and important and key, but controlling them outbound too is something that can really differentiate you and honestly keep your clients from losing data and having to notify a breach, right? So most companies out there, if you ask them what they were really scared about, it would be publishing an article that says we lost your data. That's a very scary thing to most companies.
So we had a question come in here from Marcus about the control of the outbound data at the various layers. So Marcus's question is, does that control any of the, I mean, does it make it, how does he put it? Does it have any issues with other outbound traffic coming in? Do you have to shut it all off, or can you set up protocols and whatever CIRs, whatever, to control all data and limit only what you're okay with going out?
Yeah, and I think I understand the question. So that's why it's important to have a next-gen or a layer 7 firewall. So I think Sophos has a pretty cheap one, and there's some good ones out there. Palo Alto is probably the top of the cream of the crop, but they're very expensive. But you can make those decisions. So if you use a positive security model, you basically block everything, right? And then you allow only what's needed. So if your users need to get to specific websites, then you allow those websites for the users. And you can make a rule that says this user can go to this website. It doesn't matter what machine they're on. It doesn't matter where they're what browser they're using, but they can't go to other websites. They may be allowed to go to Anchor, but they can't go to Dropbox, as an example. So you can block specific applications using the right technology.
So it's a full shutdown of control, and then you just open up whatever it is that you feel comfortable opening up.
Exactly. Yeah. So you make those rules as restrictive as possible.
Okay.
So you choose a user, you choose an application, you choose a port and protocol. So if somebody's trying to reach out to Dropbox on, port 10,022. Well, that might be fishy, and you may not want to allow that. You only allow it on port 443 or something like that. So it gives you a lot of control. And then, how do you find out if this is an issue in your environment? And so to kind of answer your question, Adam, there's scanning technologies that you can use to scan your clients. And what I would recommend is that you scan them externally, just like a hacker would see them, and you scan them internally in case perimeter controls are gotten by with using malware, or someone decided they feel like leaving the company and they want to steal all the company's data before they leave. So you run these scanners internal and external, and there's lots of great scanners out there. There's free ones, which end up, they're typically a little noisy, but they're free. So you might want to work with something like that. You have some affordable ones like a Nessus or an F-Secure, have some good products out there. And then you have, industry enterprise level scanners. And those will tell you what ports are open, what services are running on them, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and what the risks are there. It's super convenient. So,
all right.
And then after that, I think we have a whole question coming up.
I think so. So for everyone on the phone, we want to make sure we've got your attention. We've got 2 polling questions coming up. I know we've had a lot of content coming at you right now, but we want to get some information back from you. So as you think about, your MSP and kind of what you're dealing, do you have clients that are out there developing applications today? That's the key, because obviously, dealing with applications that are built from other places, there's certainly threats out there. But if you have clients who are out building proactive applications on their own business purposes or whatever the case is, we'd love to have that information from you now. So just take a moment if you'd be kind enough to answer that polling question. It's like we're coming in. Right now, it looks like Joshua and George, about half of our folks are saying no. They don't have clients developing applications. And then the other half are either for sure they are or maybe don't know yet. And that might be an interesting thought as we think about the rest of our presentation today about what about clients who are developing applications that our MSPs and our audience does not know about, and the challenges that would resolve around it. So in that same breath, we'll keep your clicker and your answer handy. And let's take a look at the second polling question around, do your clients look to you to protect web applications? So Joshua, you were mentioning a moment ago about you were working with someone they thought they had 50 or 60 web applications. They had over 2,000. So for the right now, where the responses are coming in, looks like
it's often like the company's website. So
yep.
they may look to you to manage WordPress. They may look to you to host the site, to develop the site, to update content, things like that is really what we're looking for here.
Okay, so websites, things of that nature. And so well over half, 65% of our audience says yes, their clients are indeed looking for them to protect web applications.
Okay. No, that's super helpful. And a lot of the reason we're asking that is because it doesn't make sense for me to get on here and tell you all about secure development if it's not an issue for you guys. So we'll touch base on both of those a little bit on the next slide. So real briefly, if you do have clients, and there was about 30% of you that said that you had clients that were doing development of some sort, you can build service offerings around helping them ensure that code is secure. You can do dynamic testing, which is basically a scan against a web application, a fully developed and hosted web application. It shows you issues like cross-site scripting and blind SQL injection, things like that. You can do static testing, which would be a product that you probably find and or a service that you can offer. So this is either a product that does automated scanning of code itself. So you take the code, you make it a binary, and then you send it to a company like Veracode or Checksmarks, and they'll come back with all your security issues that you need to fix in the code before you publish that code. So those can be some offerings that you guys might consider if your clients are interested in that.
And Joshua, are these the types of offerings that the MSP community can bake into their standard offerings? Maybe it's at that gold level or whatever their top is, or is this something that is kind of a best fit as a side conversation, an a la carte option, something that are we looking at monthly revenue, or is this more like a project with a client?
I would say, it could be a project is how I've seen it put together most often. For example, if you're doing a static test, you're reviewing code, typically those products are priced by lines of code. So if you have 10,000 lines of code, they're going to charge you differently than you have 50,000 lines of code. The dynamic testing, which is the scan of a website, that's a little more boxable, I guess, right? So you can go find a product like an Acunetics or an App Spider or MTO Spider or something like that, and you could offer that to your clients as part of your review, right? So we're going to scan your website. Even if you're not in charge of hosting it, right, your clients may find value in you telling them when they have a SQL injection issue on their primary website. So these are offerings that you can offer your clients. I would definitely charge for them. Most of the time when you hear that an application has been pen tested, it's actually had an application scan. And we'll go into that in a little more detail later, but application scanning has a lot of value and easily resold. And then, if your job is protection, you may want to, there's two methods here to protecting a website and ensuring it can't get hacked. One, you scan it, you find the issue, the vulnerabilities, and then you fix those. The second is you just put something in the way that won't allow a hacker to get to those vulnerabilities, whether they exist or not, or some combination of the two. And so if you want to do something like that, you want to look at it like a web application firewall. And what I would highly recommend is looking at a service like a Cloudflare or an Encapsula that will actually stand between your client's customers and your client's website and inspect those web requests. It's web application firewall, pretty simple. For those of you doing WordPress, there's a great little product called SecureAnywhere, S-U-C-U-R-I, that you can add to your WordPress. It's a plugin, and it will, WordPress is notoriously vulnerable because of different plugins and things like that. It does a great job of protecting it. It's a great service. And one of the side benefits to some of these web app firewalls is they have some DDoS protection as well, which depending on what your client does may or may not be of concern.
Okay. Very nice. And so you mentioned a moment ago pen testing, and I think this is one of the more interesting sides of this particular conversation that I kind of intrigued upon, and because we hear about the evolution of the workforce, the evolution of skills, the evolution of cyber crimes, and at the same time, I think there's a proactive side on the good team, right? The good guys over here, where we know that cyber criminals are really smart, and now we need to put people in place to really be proactive against that. So Joshua, can you tell us a little bit about kind of the progress, the evolution of pen testing and the evolution of a red team?
Yep. So this is the most exciting probably the sexiest part of security, right?
Which is the reason some idiot like me gets excited.
Exactly, yeah. I get excited about it too. It got me into security. But the idea is with the pen testing or red team is you are impersonating a hacker, and you're trying to get into the website. You're trying to identify each and every vulnerability that a hacker could use against your client or against your company. And I threw together a very quick list of things that you might include in a pen test. This would be a department that you would probably put together. You'd find experienced pen testers. You'd offer this product to your customers. Or you find some sort of service that does a lot of this for you. Core Security, one of our sister companies, does pen testing at a pretty reasonable price. But keep in mind, I mean, they may charge you $20,000 to do this pen test, and you could probably resell it for $30,000 or something like that. But there's a certain size required of your customers before you can do something.
You're hitting the kind of almost reading my mind, Joshua. So obviously this might not necessarily be, the mom and pop dental office that's been in business for 50 years and about to have a couple of folks retire. Who's the type of clients that this really resonates with and really, really matters to their business model?
Anyone with a big web presence. Facebook, as an example. Right now, they're in front of Congress because they lost data, right? So anybody with a web presence, anybody with larger corporations, anybody that has PCI does have requirements for penetration testing. HIPAA, it's built into HIPAA. It's hard to tell someone they have to do pen testing, but they should. HIPAA really does prescribe it. So these types of things are important, and you don't have to do a full pen test. Like I mentioned before, most pen tests that you go out and pay for are really application vulnerability scans. And those are very simple to do. So you buy the right software, something like an Acunetics, and you go out there and you point it at the website and you scan. And it comes back and it tells you, here's what's wrong and here's how I found it. And it gives you examples of what it was able to do. And it tells you the risk and the remediation. You can take all that, put your logo on it, and bundle it up to your clients. And that will, it's not like you're even offering a lesser service. These are real vulnerabilities that a hacker can use against you.
And that's the point of a pen test, right? It's not,
exactly.
I mean, when you come down to all the really smart people that really get into this, it's a matter of identifying vulnerabilities.
Yep.
So if our MSP community can essentially check that box through the application scanning tools, it's essentially the same thing of sorts as hiring out a full red team.
Yep, exactly. And some of the folks on the call may have a lot of interest in this. This is exciting stuff to IT folks.
Hey, George, have you ever had any experience with on the pen testing side or any of the active kind of posing as maybe you are a hacker? We don't know that, but
we've got a lot of experience on pen testing. Obviously, we get ourselves pen tested quite a lot. I mean, as you can imagine, as a security company, we're pretty paranoid about what goes on. I think the problem is that most of our customers and most of our MSP's customers are probably sub 100 seats. And it really depends very much on the sector that they're in, whether they're actually willing to spend the money to do this. And I think, it comes that problem of an SMB and affordability and what budget they've got and everything else. And it's a constant, battle, because they're obviously not got the resources of a larger company to do it. So I think what we're seeing is we're going to see more and more automated tools come to do this. We're going to see things that are more cloud-based services, et cetera, that will do some of this job. And I think some of those things don't need to be expensive. And I know I just don't like the cat out of the bag. Actually, our CISO is a guy called Gary Hazlett. He's quite a famous guy. He's published quite a lot of books on being a CISO and what the thing about CISO is. And he's doing about 3 or 4 sessions at RSA next week, et cetera. And I know he's very keen on using his expertise and applying that to small, medium-sized businesses and MSPs. So I think, as I said, it's an area where you can expect us to start looking at putting together maybe some sort of offerings in this area as well. I mean, we realized that education was important, and I think we realized that this audit area, this initial, people are taking on clients or renewing clients or whatever, it just it's not become, you need the defenses now that, probably a few years ago, SMBs wouldn't even consider it to be important. But it's very sad, I'm afraid, but it's just,
Yeah, and if anybody could put that together, it'd be Gary. Gary is a very sharp guy.
Yeah.
So we'll move on after this, but real quick, just wanted to walk you through kind of each of the different steps that you could offer. Jot down these topics footprinting, which is basically going to the dark web and seeing what's available on your clients, understanding what their IPs are, what they're exposed to, things like that. Scanning, automated exploitation through somebody like a Metasploit, manual exploitation and reporting is what a typical pen test would look like. And if you want to dive into that, you can look at the OWASP testing guide. SANS has training on that. There's lots of good places to go learn how to be a pen tester.
Thank you, Joshua. And George, I think this rolls us into, I think you're going to walk us through this slide, the SecureAnywhere timeline.
I'll probably do that but just really briefly. It's just to give some people some idea about who Webroot are, and I think sometimes we're very bad at expressing that, but basically the company really sort of reinvented itself from about 2010. So anything you knew about Webroot before 2010, it doesn't apply basically. So we acquired a couple of companies. BrightCloud, who I mentioned, was sort of like we're a URL filtering company, and another company called Prevex, which was actually a UK company, which were really looking at sort of like host IPS and ways of looking at behavior to if you like, recognize malware attacks. So we came to market actually in 2011 with really what I would call the first, predictive collective behavior-based detection, prevention, protection solution using real-time threat intelligence. And then the MED, if you want to, is maximum entropy discrimination, which is a form of machine learning that we started off with there. In 2011, we did some mobile work. SecureAnywhere, which is the endpoint product we had, decided to break into the global MSP market around 2012. We launched the business product then. I ran across a company called Anatel, who most people don't know is a big telecom company in Australia. I think I was about the 10th largest MSP in the world, and they said, we really think this is a great product for MSPs. So we sort of started to focus in on that. An interesting technology which we integrated in 2013, and I've only just seen sort of equivalents now sort of starting to come to market. In fact, last year, 2017 with Google, but it was a real-time anti-phishing protection. We sort of recognized the need for the fact that people are going to click on those links regardless, and that there needs to be some sort of intercession about looking and trying to discover if that's a phishing site or not, and doing that very quickly and accurately. So that was quite an interesting technology to bring to market. I think from an MSP side, you start to see 2014, 15, we started to get some momentum there. We started to partner with a lot of the RMM partners we were talking about in the RMM tools, and realized that was important, both to help the MSP in the sense of manage things through a single pane of glass, but also to cut down their costs and keep cutting down costs, something we're very sort of focused on. And then briefly, just at the end, we've acquired a company called Cyberflow, and it's got an offering called Flowscape, which we've not really prioritized and brought to market yet. You, again, expect to see things about that. That's a very interesting technology. That's more about looking at north, south, east, west traffic within networks, looking at behavioral analytics and metadata, and use netting data to recognize things like IoT devices, SCADA, and be able to sort of look for anomalous behavior and be able to mitigate threats very early on in the life cycle. So some interesting sort of technology there, which I think we're going to see a lot more of, and some of the sort of sophistication we think that MSPs are going to need going forward as well. And then some, we obviously it's DNS. We haven't mentioned DNS, but one of the things that I keep thinking as we've gone through this presentation is that using outbound DNS services, which look at all the traffic leaving a network regardless, including the application traffic, and can look at calls to malicious domains and malicious sites and give you visibility of that is a very good way of actually stopping some of those, call homes, command and control server calls, etc., from happening. And we're seeing quite a lot of traction and success with that now, as people start to realize that DNS is a really nice layer to have outside even sort of your application firewalls and your web firewalls, etc. It's because it handles all internet traffic. It's a really good way to do some of that control. And I think Joshua has mentioned earlier, if you don't want people to go to particular sites, obviously you can use URL categories and things like that to start blocking all those sort of sites, or you can go into sort of like an allow model. I'm only going to allow certain things as well. And then really to bring everybody up to date, we purchased a company called SecureCast last summer. This was a security awareness training company. We felt that, again, I was speaking to MSPs, one of the things that really stood out was, users being the weakest link, phishing still being the predominant way of attacking. So we moved sort of towards that model, and we decided a security company, obviously with evidence of threat information, that we're able to look at what was going on in individual devices through our endpoint, and marrying that all together would give us a very strong offering where we could maybe become far more, if you like, targeted and relevant to the individual user's needs for security awareness training, and presenting that to them in an automated and controlled fashion, and on a continuous fashion as well, because that's how it's going to be effective. So some interesting developments there. So that's in a nutshell, sort of tries to give you some idea of the spread of where we're at. I didn't mention the Bright Cloud stuff too much, about the TI services, but as I said, those have been phenomenally successful. And in that period, 2014 to 17, we literally got 70 odd vendors. And Palo Alto, as mentioned earlier, use our technology currently. There's A10 networks, there's F5, there's a whole lot of really big network and security vendors using something, maybe an IP reputation or IP, things like that. And it's quite likely that a lot of the MSPs here actually, whether they know it or not, will probably be some bit of Webroot in their infrastructure through the other actually kits that they're using. And because we're, as I said, it's a pretty large reach now with that. We've almost become a de facto for the rest of the industry and supplying them with very accurate and timely TI. Next slide, if you want to go there. We talked about applications. I'm going to take very little time on this, but again, we have a very different view to that. Obviously, we look at every single new application or changed application that lands on a device. And one of the problems, we were talking about homegrown applications. That's obviously something, if we've never seen it before, we're very likely to say, hey, we're not going to stop that from executing. So that's obviously a problem in environments. So, often when people deploy our product, we talk about something called silent audit mode, so they can actually see all those sort of homegrown applications, and they then start to whitelist them and override them for their particular environment. Again, we have a very unique approach to treating malware, still a very unique approach compared even to the other next generation products, which tend to have followed on behind us. I mean, we obviously came to market before next gen was actually invented as a phrase, but we definitely weren't an AV. We were a completely new solution to that. So some idea, this just gives you a cycle of the fact that last year we saw about 1 in 50 of all new executables we saw on a machine, about 2% of them were malware, or what we call a PUA, a potentially unwanted application. But in the majority of those we deal with right away, but sometimes we don't know, and that's a very different sort of approach, because we actually admit we don't know, whereas most of the other companies just say, well, I'm going to block it or allow it, and they make the decision then and there. We actually buy ourselves time through various strategies to do that, and actually over a period of time sort of decide with very high accuracy whether that application files and processes are actually malicious or not. And just that gives us a very high overall efficacy. It also gives us the ability to sort of report on what we're finding as well. So if you've got unknown applications running in an environment, I'll show you some website things, I think, if you're using our product, but even if you're not using our product, you can check up, you can sort of look at MD5s and sort of see if we know about it. Yeah, dwell time, thanks for moving that along. This is just one, again, a thing which is very unique to us. We'll tell you when we first saw an infection globally. We'll tell you when it actually was determined as being malicious, when it came into the environment, how long it's been in the network. You can mine down on the right-hand side into sort of, what that was, and how long it stayed there, because we have this dwell time period, and we do that. And really it presents what I would call EDR light. We've not given you, if you like, a complete kill chain. We're not giving you all that that information, but nonetheless, enough information to sort of to see what's important. We actually feel that MSPs tend not to want. I mean, it's nice to report it, obviously, but actually they're not going to use kill chain information. They're not going to go in. They haven't got security forensic analysts going in to do that sort of work. So so we sort of our products we've done this light version. Anyway, you can still report in it, and it's quite a unique thing to be able to report on what infections and what machines and when and where and what they were. Sorry, next slide, please. Just to give you some idea, and just to point out the fact that we've got these different overrides, web overrides, file overrides, and you can see the whitelisting, blacklisting. So you'll see things which you can whitelist and blacklist in your own environment. And we often talk to MSPs about keeping this maintained and making sure it's up to date, because you don't have to necessarily whitelist things terribly long. We should be whitelisting them for, and you shouldn't have to, unless you're doing something really weird. And we do have this where, obviously, if you've got a trading floor and you've got a keylogger on a trading floor because you've got to buy compliance laws, record every keystroke made by the trader, then obviously you can allow a keylogger, which would obviously like in an organization, you can allow that in that environment and for that group of users. Just the fact you can scan logs, but I think you pop onto the next slide, that's probably more interesting than that. I'll sort of end that very quickly. There is this actually, too far. File hash and URL repetition lookup. Obviously, you won't be able to submit a file because that's basically something that's done by our customers to do that. But there is an MD5 lookup, so if you wanted to hash a file and say, do you know about this? Can you tell me more about it? You can do that. And there's also a URL reputation lookup too, which can be quite interesting to look at URL reputations. And sometimes, and you talk about web applications, and you're talking about protecting web sites. If you want to put in your clients' sites, we do a whole thing where we'll contextualize that and correlate that. So we'll say, all the things that website's connected to, whether it's connected to, what sort of files, what are mobile apps, any malicious files, any malicious domains, etc. So maybe quite an interesting thing to use. And that's all I want to say about application. I'll just hand it back to you. I didn't want to. It's just really sort of a.
It's all great stuff. Thank you so much, George. And I think that really brings us to the end of the session. I think we've gotten through most of the questions that have come in through GoToWebinar at this point, but if you've got any last thoughts, I think we're here at the last few minutes. And as people come in, I'll just go through and essentially start wrapping this up. So George, thank you so much for attending on behalf of Webroot and bringing everything from your perspective to us today. I think it's been a lot of value to our audience and certainly to myself as well, so thank you. Joshua, again, thank you so much for being here and helping lead this conversation.
Yep.
And, for everyone else, as we mentioned, this is the second one of these security webinars, and we've got a few more coming up planned through May at this point. Our next episode will be focused on endpoint security. We'll be partnering again with George and the folks at Webroot to really bring, I think, even that much more closeness to this particular topic of endpoint security. And then as we move on we'll have a couple of sessions on network, and then I forget what we're ending on. But long story short, we've got a lot of great information on security, cybersecurity, and really the methodologies behind both protecting yourselves and your clients, and most importantly, how to make money on this. In that breath, hopefully you've gotten some ideas on how to maybe leverage the various tools that you're using today, or maybe looking into some other assets to build your solution stack around the application environment, both internally, externally. As we know, there's many vulnerabilities out there in our infrastructures, and I think thanks to our friends at NBC, we can say knowledge is power. So the more you know, or whatever the case may be at that point. So I think I've filled enough at this point as it relates to fluff time. No more questions at this point. I wish everyone a great Thursday. Sam, thanks again for helping us run and keep things in line. George, one last final goodbye to yourself and Joshua and everyone else. Thank you for the time today. We look forward to next time.